it's been one of those up and down seasons, and that's part of what life is like when you have a player like Nico Hoerner. Welcome into Northside Territory, Foul Territory Network's Cubs podcast. I'm Sahadev Sharma with my partner Patrick Mooney. We're your Cubs beat writers for The Athletic. Patrick, today, the Cubs, are they stuck? That's the theme for today's episode.
Yes, end of episode. We're done.
I think we've probably talked about this in different ways over the course of the year. But it's something that I keep hearing from people around the league, and not so much as like stating fact, as much as like asking the question, like what are the moves? How do they get to a place where they're not kind of like stuck in this 83 to 85 win cycle of like where it kind of feels like they are. We talked the last episode about everyone kind of admitting the need to get better. They're not hiding the ball here. They know they're not good enough. And there was this big jump from 22 to 23 that I thought was very that gave some optimism, right? Like that made it feel like here's the progress, and there was supposed to be another jump this year. And that didn't happen, and that makes it feel like, oh, wait a second, where are they? Are they this 83 win team? Is that what's been built? And when you look at the current roster and you look at the contracts, you start to wonder, how do you get better? Okay, and I think it comes down to there's a lot of different things that we could talk about here, but the corner outfielders are good ball players. They just are. And I guess right now Seiya is not a corner outfielder. He's been DH for about 2 months. But still, let's call him a corner outfielder, or at least if he's watching a DH, whatever it is. It feels like, well, those are spots you want, like you could maybe find a superstar bat. I don't know if it's easy to find one, right? Like like some people look at it that way. Those are good ball players, and you don't want to get rid of them, but they're locked into those spots, and you have prospects that could fit into those spots. So kind of what do you do? How does this work? What's the vision to make this 83-ish win team a 90-ish win team or more? I'm not sure if we're going to solve that conundrum during this episode, but something that
no promises.
The front office is faced with answering this question. It's their job to kind of solve this.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. I think we've had the same experience in reporting out different stuff towards the end of the year, and that perspective that's gained as game 162 approaches. Like, this is not just like a Twitter rant or argument. Like, this idea of being stuck, like, it's very much an idea that internally and externally around the baseball industry is being bandied about. And I think you're right to point out that these are good players. This is not being stuck with like Jason Hayward at his lowest offensive moment with like a super long contract on the horizon. These are still shorter term, medium term deals at reasonable prices for the production. I think it's going to be fascinating to see what Cody Bellinger does. I mean, as of the other day, there was no decision had been made. I'd imagine they would take some time in October to assess options and the like. But if Cody does come back, I think you'll probably get another good season out of him. Seiya, it's funny when you mentioned the DH stuff. When we were at Dodger Stadium a couple weeks ago, Pete Crow Armstrong had, just an awesome series, and he was being interviewed, including on TV, by a group of us. And he was trying to deflect attention and say, well, we got 4 great outfielders here. And then he caught himself. He's like, well, 5. Sometimes I forget that Seiya still plays the outfield. And he wasn't like trying to rip Seiya. It was just kind of a really funny, like unscripted, lighthearted moment. But, I think the Cubs are kind of going back and forth here of like, yeah, Seiya's a pretty good DH. That's probably his best position, but you don't want to like lose that ability in right field either, just in case something happens. And I still think Bellinger could be really valuable. Like his ability to cover all those different positions really plays over 162. And so that's why you wrote it again, and I've written it before, and I don't think you can hammer the point enough. Like they need pitching. You wrote about some of the pitching prospects in the Athletic this week. I just think if you have that guy towards the front of your rotation who can really lengthen things, and then you figure out some of the position player side stuff later.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's probably I think that's the philosophy you kind of have to look at here. It's not about like what position are we weak at, where like we need to upgrade at position X, right? Like catcher isn't good enough, upgrade there. Okay, yeah, great. How are you going to get a better catcher? Really hard to do. So I'm not saying don't explore it, don't try and be creative, but that doesn't mean you bang your head against the wall all winter trying to solve only that and don't search for other creative ways to get better. The most obvious and easiest path to getting better is really improving the rotation. Already a strength, make it even better, right? I think we all agree that that's likely going to happen, or they're likely going to attempt to make that happen, because it's easier to do with what's available. Improving catcher is really hard. I think one area that I think is worth debating, and I go back and forth on this, but is trading Nico Hoerner to upgrade offensively at second base, which could be Matt Shaw. I think there's an argument to be made that maybe you get a placeholder for a couple months, someone that you trust can be league average or better offensively there, and then also be willing to move to the bench when Matt Shaw's definitely ready. Maybe you just push Matt Shaw and say he's the opening day second baseman. I don't know. I'm trying. This is more of an exercise than a like the Cubs have to do this. It's just something they have to explore because he's tradable. He's valuable. You can market him as a shortstop, and you do that.
Yeah.
And he's gonna, like, what is he? He's like at 100 weighted runs created plus now, after being like it's been one of those up and down seasons, and that's part of what life is like when you have a player like Nico Hoerner who is super contact oriented and doesn't put the ball over the fence. There are going to be like these up and down performances because it's heavily reliant on BABIP. But he, if he gets the ball in the air and hits it on the line, he's gonna do better. And he's had some better games of late, and you're seeing that as it's exactly 100 weighted runs created plus, not far off from where he was last year or even the year before. His WAR is a little bit down, but I think that's because he's not being rated as highly defensively, and frankly, he's a great defender. So I think that's where it gets interesting. Like, what can you get for him, and then how do you feel about the upgrade at second base? So the question, and I was having this chat with another writer yesterday. I feel like the question isn't just like, what's the upgrade at second base? It's what's the combined value of trading him, what you get in return, and then the whoever you put at second base, right? That, like, what's that value bring to the team? Because it's all about, like, Council said it the first time we talked to him at the winter meetings, I believe. He's like, we're solving for wins, right? When I asked, I think I asked him about like the impact that a superstar bat could have on the lineup. Like, and he's like, ultimately, what you're trying to do is like, yeah. Would we love to have one guy that provides 8 wins? Yes. Yeah, I'd love that. He's like,
Yeah.
but if we can get that from 3 different players, maybe it's just as valuable. I don't know if I fully agree with just that statement.
I don't believe that.
But especially when you're talking about a lineup. But I think when you're talking about a player like Nico Hoerner and you're trying to upgrade the offense at one position, and then you're getting, I don't know what, I don't want to speculate too far as names that you can get for Nico Hoerner, but is it an impact reliever? Is it a number 3 starter? Is it a top prospect and a 5 starter? I don't know. I'm kind of like, I don't know what his value is, but you can think about different areas too. Maybe it's a catcher, right? Who knows what you can get. But teams are going to want a player like him. He's a league average bat. He puts the ball in play, and he's an elite defender who can be a plus defender at shortstop as well.
We're busy. You're busy. And figuring out food all the time is a hassle, especially when you're trying to eat right. Fuel up with Factor's no prep, no mess meals.
Meet your wellness goals thanks to the menu of chef-created meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor features fresh, never frozen meals, dietitian approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great-tasting meals.
Treat yourself to restaurant-quality meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and salmon. With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll always have new flavors to explore.
Head to factormeals.com/FOUL50 and use code FOUL50 to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month. That's code FOUL50 at factormeals.com/FOUL50 to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active.
Yeah, I think it'll be hard to line up that value, but I have to say I did not see a Paredes type trade coming this trade deadline, so maybe the Cubs are more creative than I had given them credit for. My gut feel, I still don't like it. I think you're talking about, I mean, not you in particular, but just the general discourse of this is like needing a lot of things to happen and kind of shuffling things around when I don't think Nico is the problem. I don't think Ian Happ is the problem. I just think they need just more around them. And I'm curious, Sahadev, I know you've talked to Ian Happ. I think you got a story coming at some point here on the short-term horizon. Like, I don't really quite know why. And maybe it's just exaggerated on social media, but it seems like people don't really have a lot of affinity for Ian Happ. I'm trying to think of the right way to say it, but this is a homegrown guy who decided to stay, who married a girl from the Chicago area, who's really like found himself as a player, turned himself into a Gold Glove winner, granted not at a premium position, but for someone who had bounced around defensively earlier in his career and offensively had lots of peaks and valleys as a young player, he's really found a nice level of consistency and really I do think enjoys playing at Wrigley Field and gets it in a lot of ways. What are your takeaways from his year as we near the end here?
Yeah, I mean, Ian's put up his best season of his career, you know, like he's gonna be pushing for WAR this year, and I mean, we're talking about a guy that like in his first few years was like 1.5. That's because he was a poor defender at multiple positions and high strikeout guy that it was like high peaks, low valleys, and he's really like, yeah, are there valleys at times? Sure. But they're not as extreme, and he quickly gets out of those stretches, and he can kind of work through it by like, okay, here's some walks and getting on base for you. And yeah, is plus defense at left field like the most valuable thing? No, it's not. But he's a good all-around player. He's a quality player. He's a good influence in the clubhouse. He's not like this super talkative guy or like rah guy, but he's certainly has a good work ethic. And I think he gets a bad rap for that because he has other interests other than baseball. But it's not like he doesn't put the work in and know the game and try to get better. I did kind of ask him about like that idea of like people not like, fully valuing fully valuing him. He brushed it off. He wasn't that interested in like what he's like. I know what I bring to the table. He's a confident dude too. You
for sure.
It's not like he's lacking in confidence. He knows who he is and what he wants to be. He even pushed back on me on when I brought up like a power dip. He's like, I just don't fully agree with that. Like, this is one of his best years when it comes to power since he became a consistent player, right? Like that happened in 2022, right? Like the consistency came, but the power kind of dipped.
Yeah.
And he's like, look, it's a matter of like 5 balls that get hit off the wall or that go for doubles that end up over the fence. He's like, if you combine my extra base hits, it's all very similar. It's just like a couple are going over the wall this year that didn't go last year. And he's like, and that's extra weird this year because of the way Wrigley played. So he thinks there's a little bit of randomness in the power department. He thinks he just clipped a few better this year than the previous 2 years, especially in 2022. We talked about it a lot. Like he thought in 2022 there were like so many balls that got knocked down by the wind or just like barely, like that ended up being doubles off the wall. And you know, that's fine. Like I told him, I was like, I'm looking strictly at the numbers, not like every single hit. Like, and the numbers say you're having one of your better ISO seasons, power seasons in a while. And he's like, no, that's fair. So
just two nerds talking about numbers.
Yeah.
Half slacker.
So I mean, it's fun to talk to him about that because he's not going to just be like, oh, these numbers make no sense to me that you're saying, and I'll just nod my head and then say some nonsense. And he'll come at you with specifics. He's like, I did this 8 times, and he's like, well, I did 8 and whatever. He had like exact numbers, and I was like, I don't know if that's true, but okay. So I think he's a valuable player. I think that he's on a bargain deal, and frankly, Nico is too. Nico's making like $11 million, and is probably worth like 25 when you consider like dollar per WAR. Like that's just how baseball. It's hard to. I know fans, especially when you're not like hitting 30 plus homers, fans struggle to find the value in a player. But like Nico's incredibly valuable. Happ isn't and I think it's all going to come back down to this, Patrick. They're not superstars, right?
Yeah.
So that makes it a little harder to say like, well, I love this player, for the fans. Like this guy just, this guy makes it all happen. And especially guys like, well, first of all, Seiya doesn't speak the language, and then Happ's not this super demonstrative guy. Like and like you can overcome that like Chris Bryant did by being an MVP, right?
Yeah.
But like people loved Rizzo because he always had some good quotes and like played to the fans and like had like more of an outgoing personality. Javi was flashy. Wilson, he knew how to play to the crowd, right?
Oh,
like,
for sure.
so you
doubt.
have these players that from the previous core that like all had different reasons why fans just like love them. I mean, Schwarber, how can you not love that pitch? By the way, the pitch that he hit on Tuesday, just like I love watching his development. 98 at the eyes, and he's hitting it out. Like that was what crushed him his entire time with the Cubs, and he's rocketing that out of the ballpark. I don't want to derail it with Schwarber talk.
No, I think it's a good. I was even before you started down that path, I was sort of thinking like one difference between now and then is that we're talking about guys who've largely had pretty good seasons or have value in a way that when the Cubs started to decline there, we're thinking that 17, 18, 19, 20 sort of window, you had guys coming off bad seasons or off the field issues. Thinking of Addison Russell, obviously. Now you have Ian Happ and Seiya with no trade clauses. But like, it's not hard to envision a team, to your point, looking at Nico as a quality major league shortstop and valuing him that way. If we go back to that previous window, there was not a group at AAA Iowa that would rival the potential of Matt Shaw, Kevin Alcantara, Moises Ballesteros, James Triantos, and Owen Casey. Like, those are all, players with major league trajectories, potential major league value. So, like, when you have competent, solid, above average major league players and guys knocking on the door at Iowa, it does give you a lot of options. And I think there's been pleasant surprises, like PCA being basically penciled in to play center field for like 150 plus games for the next 6 years. Like, that's probably what they're thinking, what they're hoping. It's not totally unreasonable if he stays healthy. So when you have this, like, do you let some of those guys develop more at Iowa? Like, who are you going to give that pathway? I mean, do you let some of this play out at the major league level and at Iowa and go heavy on the pitching side? And then you have some really nice depth on the pitching and position player sides for the next year or two, if this is how it kind of plays out. Like, it's not what anyone wants to hear. I would not recommend that as like a plan to sell internally or to your paying customers, but like, that's kind of where they are now. I feel like, sort of stuck or stationary doesn't necessarily mean like desperate or dire, but they're gonna have to kind of pick a lane here pretty soon.
Yeah, and when you talk about depth, I do think there's something to, like, if you can find an upgraded catcher, right? Like, if you can, and I don't know if that means moving Amaya or keeping him, but if you can find a catcher that's an offensive improvement and a defensive, not a downgrade, stabilizes there. Now you're talking about all these guys at depth, right? We're talking about not moving Nico, and you upgrade catcher, you solidify the rotation.
Yeah.
Obviously bullpen is going to be treated how it's always treated.
But maybe you turn that up a little more in terms of your investment and your risk.
Sure. Like I'm not saying they go crazy spending there and get Josh Hader types, but there's probably something you can do to be a little bit more aggressive to addressing that without completely going out of what Jed and Carter do there. It may not excite people in the end, right? But like, if you have Matt Shaw, Ballesteros, Alcantara, Casey as like depth or like knocking on the door type thing in April, maybe one of them is up to start the season. I don't know, but in all likelihood, if they're depth, and then you're talking about Ben Brown, Jordan Wicks, Cade Horton, there's Hayden Wisniewski as like either bullpen arms or rotation depth, and then we're talking about other guys that have kind of developed. Like Brandon Birdsell is someone that I wrote about. He's going to be rotation depth next year. Like that's a quality arm. Like, that's where you want to be as an organization, right? Where your depth isn't, and I'm not even going to name names. where your depth isn't the guys that you're
isn't
using.
randos.
Yeah. Like, these are your really impactful prospects that are almost ready to impact the team on an everyday basis. And then the second you have an injury or the second you have under a performance, you're like, okay, here's the guy we're calling upon, and he's coming. And if he takes the job, he takes it, right? And that's how we're going to work. Ballesteros is kind of a nice little piece in the sense that you don't want to give up on him as a catcher, right? But if you have two catchers and they're playing okay, say one gets hurt for the minimum amount of time or like a month, you can call up Ballesteros. He can handle the split duties, and then if he performs, then it's like, okay, this guy's going to get time still. We'll figure it out. He'll split time with it. It'll be a 3-catcher rotation, and he'll DH at times, right? Like you make it work, right? When you have talent. They did it with Wilson. They've done it with so many players in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that you're like, how does this happen? When you have talent and they force their way, you make it work. And I think next year is the year where we're not talking about what this year where fans are like, why aren't these guys coming up yet? Next year is the year where they will be coming up. They're all those guys, unless they're traded. I didn't even mention James Triantos. I don't know who in that group is getting traded. Some of them probably are this winter.
Yeah, probably in their best interest to trade.
Yeah,
from that.
But others are going to be at minimum depth that's called upon almost immediately when there's a need, and that's how you build a good team. They do need a difference making move somewhere in there, and ultimately it may just be the rotation, because it does feel a little like we started this podcast a little bit stuck, a little bit difficult to really shake things up on offense. And I think you're right when you said we were both a little surprised by the Paredes move.
Yeah.
So if they can continue to surprise us, hey, more power to them. But right now it is hard to see a clear path to improving this lineup, at least, which is why it may have to be the pitchers. All right, Patrick, that's it for today. We'll have another podcast coming out this week to wrap up the season. We'll do that next week, I guess. Jed will talk next week as well. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. This is Northside Territory. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Subscribe to The Athletic, where Patrick and I will have you covered all off season. Thanks so much for listening. We appreciate you, listeners. Take care.